Good evening, Winterview, back with another brief dialogue for his dear friend Annastacey. This brief dialogue, as usual, taking place from the comfort of his car on the way home from work after yet another hard day's slog, saving lives in a psychological kind of way. So, tonight's brief dialogue on a particularly salient topic for my line of work: negative self-talk. That critical inner voice that won't shut up and doesn't like you very much and makes you feel miserable. What's that shit all about? Yes, I'm sure people listening can relate to this phenomena. Thought we'd have a little talk about it. What is it? Believed to be located or centered in the brain in an area called the locus coeruleus, I think, from my thinking back to university days. Maybe the research has changed and that's all wrong now. Anyway, it's beside the point. This is the thought that sounds like your voice, maybe your mother's or father's in some cases, in your head, telling you that you done bad and that there's something wrong with you and you're no good, and so on and so forth. We see it in the clinic in particularly severe cases of depression and or anxiety. The unfortunate patients report that they hear voices, and when we explore that, we find out often it's their own thoughts that just seem to be attacking them continuously. We also see it across the board in society. It's not just a clinical issue, it's something that a lot of people can relate to. It's that little voice that pipes up when you make a mistake, calls you an idiot. Oh, you idiot. I'm an idiot. And so on and so forth. There's often a belief, I've discovered, that we need to get rid of this voice. And when we do, everything will be great. Life will be great. I'll feel better. And to be frank, there's actually quite a lot of logic behind that line of thinking. But before we go ahead and get rid of that voice, maybe we should explore what the voice is, and perhaps we'll even discover that it's the voice itself trying to get rid of the voice. Maybe. So, the critical inner voice. First and foremost, we start, as always, with the person. Sipping a coffee, by the way. That was another sip there. Okay. Apologies there. Needless interruption. We start with the person. This idea that I exist in this body or as this body. With this core, I don't want to say belief, but I'll say belief. It's more than a belief. It's something more than a belief. But let's just roll with belief. With this core belief comes the very powerful sense of agency. That is, the ability to direct one's life as one desires. This is a very powerful illusion. The reason I call it an illusion is because there is no central self who is directing one's life. I can't really say that life isn't being directed. Perhaps it is, but perhaps that's unknowable. The way we think about it, though, is illusory in a way. But more on that later. With this powerful sense of agency comes the secondary belief that if I'm in charge, then I'd better do a good job, or I should be doing a good job, something along those lines. And we start to get into the realm of ego dynamics. The ego, we'll call it in this case, is the presumed center of existence, the self in this case. Now, this is one definition of ego. There's quite a few floating around in psychology and psychiatry, but let's just roll with this. This presumed core central entity by the mind is the ego. And then we've got a sort of regulatory process in the mind based on this belief that if I exist as a person or an entity or an ego and I'm in charge, then I'd better do a bloody good job of directing my life in the appropriate way. And so what happens is off we set with our lives, walking along down the pathway of life, so to speak, and then we come to a turn or a fork in the road, and we have to seemingly make a decision, one that will have either a positive consequence or a negative consequence. So we decide, or we think we decide, at least there's the appearance of a choice arising in awareness, and then we make that decision seemingly, and off we head down pathway, down to the left, we'll say. And suddenly it's raining, and things are going wrong, and the car breaks down, and there's no food, and so on. It's a disaster. And who's to blame? Who is to blame? Well, fortunately, there's that little inner voice that reminds you whose fault this was. That's right, your fault. Why is it your fault? Because you're the agent. You're in charge of your life. You should know better. The other layer that gets put on this conceptual self are the images that we hold for ourselves. What type of person do we hold ourselves to be? This is a critical element in the so-called negative self-judgment domain. It's not enough necessarily just to have this conceptualized self and this apparent agent who should be directing. We have a type of self. And what type of self do we have? Well, there's many types of selves, but we try and hold ourselves, at least most people do, to some ideal, some idealized fantasy for ourselves. And I've talked about the fantasy in another brief dialogue, so I'm not going to go into it here, but needless to say, let's just choose the fantasy of the reliable person. There's a good one, a good common one that we find broadly across most strata of society. People want to be seen as reliable, and they want to see themselves as reliable. So off they set, person in the body, definitely in charge of their lives, making the choices that they need to survive, and painting a picture of the reliable person. All nice and neat so far, until, we arranged to meet with a friend at 12 o'clock, but our car broke down, and now we're running 20 minutes late to the meeting. What does that mean? It means I'm unreliable. And what do you think is going to happen? What do you think the critical inner voice, or maybe if we go a bit psychological, the superego, what do you think it's going to do? Yeah, it's not going to be too happy with your performance here. Of course, it's not the superego's fault. Superego was trying to oversee everything and keep you in line with little hurry-ups and come-ons and all that. But now you've transgressed the imagined boundary of what was expected of you by the fantasized reliable self. And you're in trouble now, and that voice is there to remind you that you are a bad, bad person. Yeah, does this sound familiar? I bet it does. Now, we know that with people, with the conceptualized person that is, there's not just one fantasy about being a reliable person. There's often multi-layered fantasies that conglomerate and congeal around this center mass of the person. Reliable, trustworthy, hardworking, nice, blah, 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 all that. And so it's kind of a minefield to navigate life without a little blip flagging a mistake. So in a way, the way you could look at this is that you've set up your own railway line, so to speak. Maybe not a railway line, that's a bit too rigid. There's a pathway, we'll say. And the pathway is a result, or the net result, of all the constraints you've got for this person, all these fantasies. And so your person, as far as the mind is concerned at least, has to walk a very particular pathway. And every time you start to veer off this pathway, there's a little nudge coming out of the mind, like, oh, not quite that way, buddy, just pull it back. That's it, there you go. That continues on, and that's like a what do you call it? In the missile guidance system, there's a word for that. Cybernetics, I think the word is. Self-correcting, that's the word I'm looking for, where the little inner voice nudges you back, carefully, gently. But if you really overstep and you really find yourself off the pathway that you should, in quotes, be walking along, then you're going to get the DEFCON 5 red alert signal from the inner critical voice. Warning, loser, 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 mistake, 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 and so on and so forth. Then something fascinating happens, psychologically speaking. This state, or this way of living, is very uncomfortable, really. It's like you've set your own prison up and now you're trapping yourself in your own prison. It's very dissatisfying in a way, and some people have extremely harsh criteria set up for themselves, such that it's very hard to live the life that they imagine for themselves. And these people become, over time, quite bitter about this, and they feel quite trapped in themselves. And what they tend to do is they start to resent other people for whom don't hold themselves to the same standards. And so not only is your little inner critical voice pointing out your own mistakes, like loser, wrong step, move back, but it's pointing out the mistakes of others. It gets really snippy at other people. Oh, look at that person, look what they're doing, how dare they, blah blah blah, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure you can relate to that. And so that's a way of bolstering one's own self-fantasies by criticizing others as well. Another nifty little mechanism used. I've also touched upon that in my brief dialogue about the shadow self as well. Everything that we repress, we tend to project out onto others and then attack because it's a problem. And the more we attack it, the more stable we feel. So there we are, walking along life, getting nudged back into place with this critical inner voice, because we definitely are in charge and we definitely have fantasies about ourselves to uphold at all times, no matter what. Thank you very much. So what to do? I'm going to give you a little nifty trick to shut the voice up. There's a metaphor. I shut up as well. Now I'm just having a sip of coffee. Okay, that was good. Alright. This is about ownership. I can't actually remember if I've talked about this before. Maybe I have, I'm not sure. This is about, let's give it a really technical, scientific sounding term. I haven't really thought of a good term for this. Let's call it owning your own shit. How about that? Does that sound too technical perhaps? Owning your own crap. And this is a way to silence, to bulletproof yourself, you might say, silence that critical voice. Now, the self, in the more broad spiritual definition, you could say, is without objective qualities. It's this infinite somethingness, presence, being, etc., and so on and so forth. Not really definable, but we'll slap a few labels on it just to be able to talk about it. This infinite capacity for experience, that is the self, or that is one's existence, you could say, even getting rid of the word self, denies nothing, or that is, it allows everything. Everything is allowed. But this little conceptualized self is quite constrained by its conditioning, its genetics, its beliefs and rules, and so on and so forth. And because of the infinite capacity for experience that the essence of oneself is in actuality, it's a stark contrast to this meager little, miserable little character who's so bound in time and space with all these problems. But there's no rules. We find, if we become a bit philosophical for a second, what is the danger of being the things that you don't like? What is the actual danger? Let's go back to reliability or unreliability. What is the danger or the vulnerability for actually being unreliable, for being that person? The danger is a loss of face, in a way, perhaps, or people thinking negatively about you. That's the danger, of course, or thinking negatively about yourself even. But what if you could even tolerate that? What if it was okay to have others think negatively of you? Perhaps. You see, don't forget, we're talking about the fantasy of others thinking negatively about you. It's the fantasy. We don't have any evidence that people will think negatively about you. What would it be like to own, so to speak, unreliability? What would it be like to be both reliable and unreliable in equal measure? Not one or the other, or both. What would that feel like? To just totally own your own unreliability, to reclaim your humanness, you might say. A human is not a super duper amazing God, as the ego might like to imagine it. The human is fraught with limitation and problems and issues and hang-ups and neuroses and bad habits and phobias and dumb ideas and reckless behavior and all sorts of madness. And also great stuff too. Compassion, love, nurturing creativity, affection, social connectivity, friendship, and so on and so forth. It's full of everything, really. Both. So why are we limiting it to one or two things? Why can't we be everything? What's wrong with being everything? So we start to reclaim ourselves by allowing ourselves to be everything. Now when I say allowing ourselves, that's highly conceptual, but what I'm really saying is tolerating the discomfort around the things that we deny. And it might be hard at first to tolerate the discomfort, to allow oneself to be unreliable, but it's a very powerful position. Suddenly you can be unreliable and reliable in equal measure. Sure, I'm unreliable. It's a simple way to own it. I'm unreliable and I'm reliable. Sometimes I'm reliable, sometimes I'm not. So what? So we tag a little "so what" on the end. The "so what" is important. We tag that on the end of that statement because this life that we find ourselves in is so utterly mysterious and infinite and beyond even our ability to conceptualize it. Our conceptualizations are just one little drop in the water. We don't know much about what's going on, really. We don't know if being reliable or unreliable is important. We have no idea. But in our smallness, you might say, we've decided, only reliability is important for this world. Unreliability is not important. How do we know that? That's a big claim to make. How do I know that someone doesn't need me to be unreliable occasionally? I don't know that. So I'm going to own it. I can be unreliable and reliable. I can be nice and I can be unfriendly. I can be thin, I can be fat. I can be funny, I can be dull. I can be anything. There's no rules about me anymore. There's nothing. Sure, I was late and I'm a douche. What are you going to do? Maybe I'll do better next time. Maybe I won't. I don't know. I tried to get there on time, but I didn't. So I'm late and I'm a douche. I'm owning it all. I'm owning everything. Suddenly, that little critical voice doesn't know what to do. The critical voice that would say, "You're late, you're a loser," is right. Yep, I am, and I am. And the critical voice is like, "Good, okay, you know that? Right, well, I guess my work here is done. Guess it is. Critical inner voice, guess your work here is done. Yep, so I'll see you later then. Yep, okay." And that's how it rolls. Suddenly, you've disarmed it. Disarmed the critical inner voice with the briefest nod to your infinite nature, you might say. There's a nice way of putting it. A little nod to that. If my nature is infinite, then I can be anything. I can be anything. I don't have to be afraid of my shadow anymore. I don't have to be afraid of being unreliable. Sometimes I'm unreliable. Sometimes at work, I do a really crap job. Sometimes I'm lazy. I can't be bothered. I actually can't be bothered. Sometimes I listen to a client and I don't care. Sometimes. And sometimes I'm amazing. I do an amazing job. I'm inspired. I lift them out of depression. And I get them on their feet and I send them on their way and they're so grateful. And other times I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm useless. I'm everything. And I'm nothing. Anyway, I could go on and on, but I think you get the picture. So the message, I guess, this is a bit of an instructional kind of audio, a rare treat for you, you might say, is to, next time that little critical voice pipes up and suggests that you're something, just agree with it. That's right, I am. Next time it pipes up and tries to criticize someone else, you agree with that. Yep, they are. They are. They are indeed. Anyway, I hope this was in some way useful or helpful to anyone listening. This has been Winterview with another brief dialogue. Comments are welcome. Thank you.